Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 Champions of Literacy. This is a very interesting moment for us all. We are here celebrating 15 years of Treehouse Books, and yet we are not together. We are not in a huge hall with live music and drinks and snacks and a whole table of things to bid on in an auction. We are here on Zoom, or YouTube Live, and that's just the way that it is. And we're still excited because we're still excited about the ways that Treehouse Books has impacted lives and continues to impact lives. And this year is just an example of the ways that Treehouse Books has risen to the challenge over the 15 years of our existence. And so we're really excited for you to join us. This is our first virtual event of our 3-event celebration here on YouTube Live. And we're so glad that you decided to join us this evening. So buckle up, it's gonna be an amazing time. And we really hope that even after tonight, you can go and get some tickets for the other events. They're each going to be fantastic. So we are here and we have cultivated an event that we hope really speaks to and really reflects the values of our first panel. Is called Why Black, moderating the panel. Directors of Treehouse Books, and now is about to become the advisor about having her here. She College of Education at Temple University and a supporter of treating. Dr. Brooks is MK Asante, recording artist.
Hi there. I think we are having a little technical difficulties. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so I'm not sure if everybody was able to hear the introductions, but we are excited tonight to talk to a panel. And our panel consists of 3 individuals that I think form a really nice nexus together because of the ways in which they connect around our topic of why Black books matter. So we have 3 panelists. Our first one is Sabriaya Shipley. And Sabriaya is the director of education at Treehouse Books. So there's Sabriaya. Thank you for joining. We also have Jeannine Cook. Jeannine, are you there? Let's see. All right, there she is. All right.
I'm here.
Yes, and Jeannine has, we'll learn more about it, but she has recently opened a bookstore. So we'll learn more about that. through our discussion. And lastly, we have one other panelist. I'm not sure if he's still here or he dropped. MK, are you here? Let's see, it looks like he's coming in. Okay, so I think let's see, he's coming in, but we can't yet hear him, but.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We cannot see you though.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I had a technical difficulty issue.
All right, there you are. And you are MK Asante.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really an honor to talk with you all, distinguished panel. So I'm honored to be here.
Okay, great. And as I said, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties. And but as we talk, hopefully we'll get to learn more about each of the panelists. And feel free at any point to chime in and add what you like and talk about some of the work that you're doing. Okay. So just very quickly, the name of this panel is Why Black Books Matter. And the organizers of this session came up with this panel topic, and I was really glad when I was thinking about it that there was no question mark behind that, like, do Black books matter, or why Black books matter, question mark, so we could pivot from that point and just really talk about the why and the how, because we're all, just fundamentally in agreement in terms of the significance of Black books and why they matter. And I thought what I would do before we start having more of an open discussion, I just wanted to get part of the work that I do at Temple is I have the pleasure of studying Black children's literature. So that's what I spend my time studying. And so I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about what some of the topics are in the field of Black children's literature and Black and also adult literature, some of the key areas that we think and talk about. And then hopefully that will then feed into our discussion, question and answer session and discussion about the topic of why Black books matter. So one of the areas, of course, when we're thinking about Black books is to think about, well, what makes it a Black book, right? What is Black children's literature, adult literature? What is Blackness? How do we define it? What does it mean to think about how Blackness is represented in stories that children read or adults read? And the issue with that also is thinking about cultural authenticity. What makes something an authentic depiction of a culture? How do we grapple with culture knowing that there's a lot of fluidity, there's a lot of heterogeneity, there's a lot of intersectionality, and culture is constantly changing. So just the idea when we say that Black books matter, the idea of what is this Blackness and how is it depicted in a text for children or adults is a key idea in the field. And another area that's really important is thinking about books as cultural artifacts or literary artifacts. And so this has also been a topic worthy of a lot of study, because when we're thinking about books as cultural artifacts, we may be thinking about the ways in which they represent or affirm a particular culture, right? The messages or values they might convey culturally. They also might be books that push back against stereotypes or absences in literature. So we look at them like that's their importance. They might be cultural artifacts in the sense that what we see are language practices in the books that represent a particular culture, right? So there's all these different ways that these books are artifacts in terms of culture, but they're also literary artifacts, right? They're also books where we want to think about the aesthetics, we want to think about the literary elements, we want to think about the different genres, right? What makes these books worthy of reading, whether they're cultural artifacts or not, right? So that whole aspect of how we define literary quality. And so that issue sometimes with the study of Black children's literature and adult literature, that issue of cultural artifact or literary artifact, I think is pretty key, right? And then the last point I just want to mention is, because the title of this panel is Why Black Books Matter, it made me think about matter to whom, right? Who do these books matter to? Who are the readers of these books? And how do we know what readers take from any book, right? Any interpretation. And so this issue of we have books that we want children to read, we want adults to read, but how do we think about what it is that readers are interpreting from books? So like, what's their motivation for reading, their purpose? Are they identifying with the books? Are they feeling affirmed by the books? What prior experiences are helping them understand what it is that they're being presented. So I think even though, I could talk about this for days and days and days, and days, but those are like big buckets, really quickly big buckets, and you might have some, of course, that I'd left out, but those are big buckets that I think kind of encapsulate this some of the topics that we think about when we're thinking about Black children's literature and Black literature for adults. And so I'm hoping in different ways those ideas might bubble up directly or indirectly in our discussion. Okay. Anybody want to add to that? Did I leave something? No. Okay.
I was just saying, well, I wrote in the chat that maybe the Why Black Books Matters needs an exclamation mark at the end.
Right. Exactly. That's all right.
A little fist emoji.
Exactly.
A little black heart to sign it off. A little black heart, all the love.
All right. Okay, so we're gonna start just with something a little personal. So what books, if any, were important to you as a youth? And I'm thinking of, before maybe middle or high school. Do you have any books that you remember that stood out to you for whatever reason? And anybody can jump in. MK, yeah.
Before high school, or
yeah? Do you have any before high school?
Before high school?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, a book that I remember reading when I was really young, before high school, before actually going into middle school, was called Watership Down by Richard Adams, I believe. And it was about rabbits that that were looking at human beings, and it was a very interesting book that made me think about how perception and how we may be perceived by animals or by other living beings, and how other living beings view us. And so it was kind of an eye-opening book, because it just made me kind of perceive things differently. And it was the first book that I'd actually finished, and I was really proud of myself, because it was we were going into, like, I forget what grade, but it was a pretty thick book, and I finished it, and I thought it was very interesting. So that's just something that comes to mind.
Okay. All right, Jeannine or Sabriaya, do you have a book that comes to mind?
So I don't know what this book was called per se, but I remember being probably in about the 3rd grade. So we're at Harriet's Bookshop, and people ask me a lot, like, why Harriet's? Why Harriet's? And so as early as around 7, 8, I remember having a project where we, that there's a quintessential project where you have to become somebody in history. And this was down in Hampton, Virginia. So I don't know, they were offish. But I became Harriet Tubman, and that was based off of reading her book. And so I think that it's amazing to me how pivotal some of those early interactions become for the rest of your life, right? You don't realize that this one little project sometimes becomes something that's going to stay with the child for the rest of their lives. So that's one for me.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that for younger children, you don't even know why it's resonating with you, but it does at a level that's underneath your being able to articulate it. Yeah, absolutely.
I've had now, since we had the shop, a bunch of folks who've come in with similar stories at that similar like 7, 8 time where they was like, Harriet Tubman just started whispering to me at that time. So I was like, this is an interesting phenomenon, and maybe.
Definitely. Sabriaya, do you have one?
Yeah. So I grew up with like my mom taking me all the time to the library, to our local cafe to hear the griots kind of story tell. And one of my favorite first like books ever read was The People Could Fly. And I was so obsessed because I'm also have a background in theater with the way in which we brought stories to life, right? And then there was also this thing of Mafaro's Daughter. That was one of absolute fave. I think it's because I was addicted to HBO at the time had Happily Ever After, which was produced by Whoopi Goldberg, and they took what we thought were traditional kind of fairy tales and turned them into cultural kind of specific things. So Goldilocks actually had locks, and BD was in Jamaican household doing it up and singing, and that to me was a way in which my mom wanted to make sure that inclusion in books was important, was first floors. And then also storytelling, the oral storytelling of books was very important to her.
So that's a good segue to the next point I wanted to talk about. Are you familiar with the metaphor about mirrors and windows? Have you heard of that? It's sometimes teachers use the metaphor a lot. But it's this idea of children or readers needing to see books that are mirrors for them, and however we define mirrors, right? Whatever it is that they need to see in terms of representations of themselves. So needing to be able to see mirrors, read books that are mirrors, but also being able to read books that are window books, right? And so I'll read to you just a quick quote from Rudine Sims Bishop, and she's the person that first introduced me to this idea, but I think it's like beautifully stated. And then I want to talk a little bit about this idea of mirror books and the importance of it. So she says, quote, "Books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through an imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experiences and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books." It's kind of a long quote, but it's very eloquent, I think. So thinking of that, sounds like you did, Sabriaya, and maybe Jeannine a little bit, but I'm wondering if you feel like when you were younger, you were able to see and read mirror books. Were you exposed to books that gave you that feeling of belonging and representation when you were younger, or maybe also when you got older?
I think for me, that was something I had to seek out on my own. That wasn't something that was handed to me, but my personality is one where I am a seeker. I ask a lot of questions like of my own self, right? Not necessarily of like the teacher or whatever. And I remember finding Alice Walker and probably was way too young to be reading Alice Walker. like seriously way too young. It's like taking the book like, whoop, like picking it up, putting it down kind of thing. And so those were things that was a part of my seeking and looking for my mirrors, because they weren't something that was handed to me per se.
But did you feel a sense of that they were missing, right? or looking for them.
I don't think I knew that it was something that was missing more than like I was just kind of like, I'm gonna find something that resonates.
Mm-hmm.
And then I fell upon her, and then, you know, kind of went down in the rabbit hole of Alice Walker for years.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I noticed as a child that something was missing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. MK, what about you?
So for me, it's a little bit different because, you know, you're at Temple, and both my mom and dad, you know, my mom was at Temple. She retired a couple years ago, but my dad's at Temple, obviously founded the first African-American studies program. So the mirrors and windows that I was seeing very early on were actually their books that they were writing, you know, Afrocentricity or the Afrocentric idea or African rhythms, unity. You know, my mom was writing books about African dance. So I saw from a very young age, I saw my mom, you know, writing numerous books about African dance in Zimbabwe, where I was born. I saw my father writing, you know, tons of books about Afrocentricity and that idea. So I was able to see early on, you know, Black authors in the crib, you know, but the only thing is they were writing a lot of academic books. So you know, I would open the book up, and I don't understand anything in here. And you know, it's still hard for me to understand some of the academic writing, not for them, but just in general. You know, I was more drawn to you know, stories and poetry and things like that. So but I saw Black writers, and then I had it in the house, you know, in our house we would have, you know, Sonia Sanchez and, you know, Charles Fuller and, you know, all these people coming over. And so I was able to experience, you know, Black writers as well and be in the same space with them and just really see them. I didn't even know that they were really writers at the time. They were just like people that
you didn't know the greatness you were around. You were a little kid, right, running around.
No, not at all.
But your parents knew. Yeah, your parents knew.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing.
And now, you know, it's interesting though, because since I would say the late 80s, early 90s, there's been a growing proliferation of books for children and youth that are, I think now, especially like middle grades and young adult literature, written, you know, about the Black experience is much more common. Whereas, you know, earlier on, we did have the African-American literary tradition for adults. And so we had those books, we had the Alice Walker and, you know, Toni Morrison, that line. But now there's a lot of young authors for younger children, I think, which maybe would have helped you, MK, at the time.
well, you know, I did find other authors, you know, that were speaking to me. I mean, at that time, you know, especially like early on, you know, going like high school, you know, and you know, Man, Child, and the Promised Land. These were books that were encouraged for me to read, you know. But the book that really changed my life, and I was really honored that, you know, the panel today. It says my connection is unstable. No, can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
You're going in and out a little bit.
I'm sorry about that, but the book Asada by Asada Shakur really changed my life.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Sabriaya, what about you? You mentioned some of them early on because it does seem like you were getting those mirror books from your mom.
I think for her, and something that I take into my teachings now is that most of the time the access to Black books and to that mirror comes from the environment that we're in, the educators that we have, the parents we had, whether or not we're a seeker, you know what I'm saying? Like that comes and those factors. And I think I was always an avid reader. I was the kind of kid who like went and my mom would be like, we're not carrying those books on the bus. And I was like, yeah, like, sis, we're gonna load this wagon up. I'm gonna pull it. Okay, we're gonna go. And one of the things that early on, she taught me the thing of agency, right? To pick out books that spoke to me, not necessarily to just pick a book up. And it's carried me throughout, like in middle school, everyone was like doing book reports. And I was like, I know what book I'm gonna do. I said, I'm gonna do this Toni Morrison Bluest Eye because it looks cute to me. And I'm like, and my mom's like, you just because it looks cute to you? I was like, yeah, you know, and it did speak to me in a way because it was featuring me, right? And so it's something I teach my treehouse kids now, that mirror of like, if you see a book and it speaks to you and it seems like it has a feature of you, but they have a lot more. I think it also comes with dates and how my mom grew up with not having that many access to books that had her image. And she was like, I'm definite that my child will have that kind of like representation. But even growing up as a kid in the 90s, in the early 2000s, there was still like the starting of these books of this. And for my kids now I'm like obsessed. I order a bunch of, like behind here, this is like books. Every book in here is either Black, Indigenous, or brown. And so and they're like, they have choices. And I think that's important, the mirrors.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question because you work with youth really small all the way up to high school age. How do they think about like mirror experiences? So when they're looking for books, what do you think it is that what would be a mirror for them?
I think what I see is a lot of visual learners. And that in my studies of Black children, at my time at Temple, I taught kind of like how this mindset of how Black children a lot of us are programmed into visuals, into auditory learning. And so when we see a book that has a cover that has our skin tone, it automatically says, ooh, that seems like something that's going to spark me, right? And an issue that we have is also sparking the wanting to commit to the book, if that makes sense. So a lot of times there is this need for, because learning and literacy has been for a lot of our Black youth in the North Philly, in Baltimore, because I'm from Baltimore, and like all these different places, literacy has become this Eurocentric tools, right? So the fact of a book and being taught through a Eurocentric lens how to read the book has stripped them of that necessity of, okay, I can read this book, interpret it for myself, for my own culture, not necessarily in a standardized way. So that's one thing that comes into introducing them to books on a daily, is to strip them of what the standard of interpreting a book is to say, okay, if you want to just look at the book and look at the images of the book and tell your own story and what the image of the book tell you, that's okay as well.
Yeah, Sabriaya, I was going to say the same exact thing. One of the things that I found and that I'm encouraging a whole lot is for the young people around me to write, right? And so it's like, okay, you know, you just were talking about Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye. She talks about, you know, if there's a book that you need to find and you can't find it, and Toni, of course, says it way more eloquently than I could ever say it. But, you know, you might be the one that needs to write that book. So lately at the interns, so it's, you know, the people who run Harriet's is myself and 3 high school interns, right? And so I'm learning from them. I tell everybody I work for them. They tell me where to go, what to do, you know. So they're like, are you getting ready for your call? Are you getting ready for your Zoom? I'm like, yeah, you know. But they inform me a lot about what gets to be, you know, what their you know, their lens is. And so I had them like on repeat watching this Toni Morrison speech where she's telling them about the power of what it means to be a writer. And I was saying to them, I said, you know, when's the last time we took the word agency, Sabriaya? When's the last time you wrote something without someone telling you to? When's the last time that you shared a story via writing that wasn't prompted by some outside adult? And they were looking at me like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, I mean, you know, you have a sacred gift, and you guys always telling me what to do. Like, then I'm giving you a little something that maybe you should do. And so you know, I've been encouraging the young people around me to, you know, to write, to be storytellers, to document this weird moment in time, and whether you're drawing that in pictures or whether you're and I'm telling them to write. I'm like, no, I want you to write. right?
Yeah.
I want you to, because I don't want that to become something that's this lost foreign art of like, oh, people once upon a time used to pick up pencils. Like, yes, that's, you know, and we're going to continue that tradition. But yeah.
Yeah, Jeannine,
Yes, you know, that reminds me of Jacqueline Woodson, who's a well-known young adult writer. When people have asked her, like, well, why do you write? Why do you write? She has said, I want to leave a sign of having been here. And I just always think like that is like such a profound statement, right? Leave a sign of having been here. And so, MK, you have written a memoir. And so I think this might be a good time to talk about that in terms of, you know, what was your experience? Maybe not, like you said, maybe not at a younger age being an avid reader, but then what inspired you to actually write your memoir when you were older?
Got you. Well, you know, thank you. You know, Buck, the memoirs, you know, young Buck, Buck Wild, Buck Shots, Buck Town, Slave Buck, Black Buck, Make Buck, Buck Now. You know, Buck is it represents, you know, not just my story, but so many other people's stories. You know, there's a lot of people in Buck who don't have a chance to tell their story, you know, people who are now passed away, people who, for whatever reason, just aren't able to tell their story. So I felt like I was telling the story for a lot of people, you know, my family story, my personal story, my community story, the things that, you know, I experienced and things that I saw. I wanted to write a book about education, miseducation, re-education, street education, self-education, and a book that talks about the difference between school and education. And that's what Buck is the of. And I wanted to write, you know, one of the best compliments I received on the book is a guard in a correctional facility told me that she gives my books his hating. And that really meant a lot to me because, you know, it is, you know, when I was 15, 16 years old, there weren't really, before I decided to start writing and reading, you know, there weren't a lot of things that were connecting with me. And so I wanted to write a book that I knew would connect with the young Bucks. You know, a book that I wanted to read. That you know, I write in a lot of ways, you know, I try to write something that I know that I would want to read, you know, at that age. And also now, I try to be, you know, Dr. Maya Angelou was a mentor of mine. And I remember going to her house when I was working on Buck, and she told me, she said, you know, tell the truth. That if you tell the truth, it'll connect with, you know, people all over. And so, but just, you know, I just wanted to tell my truth. And it's very layered, and you know, I knew it would connect with other people, and it did, you know. So that's my experience with Buck. You know, it's like I said, it's personal, it's familial, it's also communal.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I mean, I have to say, I started reading some of it. I haven't finished it yet, but it's definitely something that I want to continue to read. Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit.
I just want to say,
I'm sorry.
I can attest, like, so before Harriet's Bookshop, I used to work at Yes Philly, which is an alternative, I'm sorry, I'm like alternative high school. And Buck was one of the only books that folks would be excited to jump into, right? It was like, you know, a lot of the books they throw around, and this is one of the ones that you find tucked in somebody's back pocket just because the connection was real.
And I used to teach in North Philly at a middle school, and I used to have students who would, Walter Dean Myers was an author that they wanted to read. And sometimes, I mean, he wrote about kind of similar to your story, MK, in that, I mean, about living in a city, what that was like, and a lot of the boys kind of gravitated towards it. But what I found so interesting too was that there were parts of the book, like they were really interested in the family, the stories, the relationships. Like, so there was this, they had a kind of a whole sense of the story and what was going on. And I think just that idea that these books, the ways in which they connect to kids, it's a lot of different ways, right? It's the setting, it's what's happening, and it's kind of like these side stories about relationships and friendships and growth and development that they also connect to. So I imagine, Jeannine, what you're saying, that was part of what was happening with the youth that you were working with. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and talk a little bit more big picture. So where do you all see Black literature for youth or adults evolving? Like, how would you like it to evolve? What areas of growth do you think are needed? What kinds of books do you think we need to make more available to you? Or to your point, Jeannine, what should authors be writing, right? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that I specifically would like to see more young people publishing their own work. I think that, and I think that can be younger and younger and younger. I think that that's the trend, is that they, who can't tell a story. I think storytelling is as old as time. And so I think, to me, and in the same vein as them illustrating their own work, and, I just think that that's the trend, but we shall see.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, I really wish that for our Black children that literacy is not just defined to a book, and that it's also accessible through playwriting, through closed captioning, through screenwriting, that there are multiple sources of literacy. In my work with Philadelphian Playwrights and the Color Girl Museum, I taught Black girls from all over who were like, I don't know if I can write a play. And I was like, you can. And by the end of our time together, they were like bouncing off ideas. And I was like, this is literacy. This is what you're supposed to do, in a way, with a book that you pick up. Even when you're writing, you're engaging in literacy, you're analyzing the text, you're taking those times, similar to what Jeannine was talking about earlier, right? And so I think when kids know that, it opens up a brand new door for them, because it says, oh, so it's not just what's on the paper. It's how I analyze what's on the paper and how it brings it to life. So I think wanting to grow for multiple genres to explode, even especially poetry. I think poetry allows our children to access language even quicker and further.
Yeah, and I think verse novels, graphic novels are, in terms of young people, are becoming more and more popular and accessible. It's a way that they're finding an entry, I think, in the way that you're talking about, Sabriaya. MK, do you have any ideas that you're thinking about?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, both make good points. I agree with both points, actually. And to follow up on Sabria's idea, I think literacy, it's going to become more interactive and technological. It has to. One of the things that has been cool about, Buck for me is that I did the voice, the audio book, and I found that.
Yes.
We talk about voice but even from a very literal perspective, hearing a voice that you could relate to, like, audibly, is even powerful. And there's different settings in which, people are consuming, literature, whether through audiobooks or even through, when you think about technology. I have 2 shows right now on Snapchat, original shows, Wild Black and Free Tuition with MK Asante. And both of those shows, we use a lot of text and language on screen, and it's a lot of, we're playing around with quotes and literature and how to use it on screen. We have poets. Every episode of Free Tuition has poets on it, from Jessica Care Moore to, a local poet that you may have never heard of. And we have all these poets on. And
MK, you're
and
freezing a little
technology
bit.
is oh, it's interesting that I would be freezing talking about technology. but my point is, I think that reading literature will fundamentally at its core be the same. At the same time, we'll have to start incorporating new modes of media, because that's just where we are. And that's, I mean, I'm a professor at Morgan State, and everything is screen based, and so I think literature also has to find new ways to to exist in this new world, in this new environment where the attention spans are less. But I think it can. I think it just needs to it needs to it doesn't need to, I guess, adapt is probably a good word to the technology of the times.
And I wanted to also think a little bit about
and just real quickly, because I just want to be clear about what I mean by that. Like for me, a physical book is important. I think that it's also important to have it available in other ways, in other means, so that it can be consumed in different ways. Sometimes it's like 5 minutes, so those are very digestible bites of. That's not to consume some information. So I just think that the book at its core doesn't change, but how we promote it, how we talk about it, how we share it, excerpts, all that kind of stuff changes. We did a trailer for my book Buck, a movie trailer, for the book, and then we also did a soundtrack specifically for the book, featuring artists like Talib Kweli and Mez and people like that. So and Freeway from Philly. So I think that's just kind of the way I think about it.
Yeah, and I think like all of those aspects in terms of technology, Audible, there's actually, I'm working with a student now who's trying to do a study to think about when children hear readers, someone like you reading a book, how that kind of impacts them. But I also think about the kind of the both and, because Jeannine, you've just recently opened a bookstore, right? And so if you could talk maybe for a few minutes about, what inspired you to open that physical space. And I'm sure along with your physical space, there are other ways that people can access books through other means. But can you just talk a little bit about Harriet's Bookshop and the inspiration behind it, and how you're, trying to reach people in the community through your bookstore?
Yeah, I mean, so Harriet's Bookshop is, our collection is designed to celebrate women authors, women artists, women activists. Lots of people told me this was a silly idea. I'm up against Amazon. Nobody's reading books anymore. Black people don't read. Like, that's a common lie, that Black people don't read. It's just like, where did that lie come from? But anyway, so all of those things were kind of in the works. And at the same time, something that started off as a whisper in my spirit turned into a roar, where it was just like, no, you have to do it, and you need to do it now. And we're still here, despite all of the things that have gone on in society and all of the things that people told me wouldn't work here. Books sell, right? People read, like that is true. And I think people now more than ever have a recognition of their ignorance around a lot of topics, and so are willing to do some of the work of educating themselves. And people always are asking me for these lists. Can you give us a list so we can know, like, the list of the list of the list? And I keep telling people, self-education is a real thing. And I left the classroom. And not that I'm not still here as an educator in the community, but I'm like, where you start and where you start and where you start is going to be, three very different things depending on who I'm talking to and about what. And so, no, I'm not giving you a list of the top 10 books to read on anti-racism. No, right? Like, get on your path and begin to do that work and, see where that takes you. And I think that what MK and Sabriaya are saying are very true, right? Like, that there are these other complements to the book. And at the same time, I recognize that, when you go back and read books like Fahrenheit 451, when you look at some of those dystopian novels, when you look at Parable of the Sower, and you look at the place of the book becomes like this this tool that's used to debase and oppress, right? When people, and it's harder and harder and harder in these dystopian novels to get access to books. Like, why is that? Why is that? I need to ask myself that. And I think that, so I'm gonna be a stand for if somebody wants to come get a hardback or paperback, if you can read an audiobook and have the paperback book and have, you know what I mean? Like, and screenplay and watch the movie. Like, I don't know, that's what I do. I'm that kind of person. So, I'm not saying anybody has to be limited or stop doing those other things. I think that we need to do all of it, right? Whatever expands our thinking. And most of all, right? Like a lot of folks that's in here watching this, listening to this, have an inkling in their spirit to write something and just have not done it. And I don't care if that's a play or a poem or some sort of, even if it's just you jotting some notes down, like get that down, because there's generations to come that are going to need access to that. And if it's digital, who knows if digital will be available, and who knows if your stuff is going to get passed down the way you left it, right? So it's okay to put some of those notes down on paper and pencil.
I think there was, you mentioned earlier the issue about also just like figuring out this whole publishing world, right? The independent publishing is really important because, until we can get the distributors going, we can, we have a lot of writers or authors, but we also have to figure out how to get these books distributed to a wide range of people. So I think that's pretty key too, this breaking in more strongly into this world of publishing.
I mean, and you know what I think, and this is me like telling on myself, is like when you think about somebody like Thomas Paine, who was very, very he was, okay, we need a revolution, right? We need to get away from this country that's oppressing us. Boom, we're in a very similar position. What he did, he wrote that stuff down and he printed that stuff himself and distributed it himself, right? And so those are certain things that we can't get away from, right? We can't be dependent on this bigger institution to support our idea and our vision. Like some of us might have to get out in the community and take what you have and give it to people, or exchange it with people, because like I don't want us to be so dependent on these big machines that they stop us from actually connecting with one another.
And I think that's too, Sabriaya, you might want to, just the idea, we can kind of segue a little bit because we're kind of coming to the end, where I think I'm going to get some questions from Nicole, but just the issue of access, Treehouse Books, the library, and it being a lending library. That idea I just think is like wonderful, beautiful. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I love about Treehouse is that the notion of the lending library removes the shame of hoarding books, in a way, to say that, having books, right? Because when I say there's nothing more beautiful than seeing a bunch of children come in and have stacks this high of books and be like, all right, we'll be back tomorrow, and being like, okay. And also stripping I know for me, that library card, my mom was like, you're not going back to the library after that library fee hits, and I was like, and I think it provides access. I feel like if we give in surplus as a community, anything that's given in surplus and in love is something that people take in and give back into. So with Treehouse, when we say lending library, we say come in, take as many as you want, and they're yours to keep forever. We like to say you can do forever, or until you want to bring them back. And people are like, they're free. I'm like, yeah. Take as many as you want. Yeah,
that's how people would wrap their head around, right? They're free. Yeah, I could take them or bring it.
But Treehouse kids, they're used to it. They'll come in and be like, Miss Sabriaya, I know this is a part of your library, but I need that. Can I have that? Like, okay, cool, take it. And I think I wanted to touch on what Jeannine was talking about as far as like having it written down. I think having that source is something that's very important. I know for me, I was in a Temple class and my professor said that I couldn't find any Black playwrights prior to the 1800s. And I said, huh? And I said, thank God they wrote something, because and Dr. Kamika Williams-Witherspoon was my mentor. So, she was like, she said, what? And said, and what you talk about, having that written down, right? is the only way we would be here today. If Toni Morrison had sat there and wrote that book, like he wrote the book out, we would be like lost right now. I know I'll be lost if I know, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So the point of Treehouse is to continue that feeling, continue that history and that community throughout our children, but also the adults that are raising them. That's the most important. Because when they see their adults and parents leaving out with the same amount of books, it inspires them. And when they see me leave out with books, I think I own most of Treehouse's Black books. I'm not sorry. I've probably, Emma usually like, Sabriaya, please put some back on the shelf. There are other people who need it. I'm like, I'll bring it back if I get to read. So yeah. So that's what the point of Treehouse. It really is.
Well, so there's I'm getting fed a few questions now. So there's a question that kind of relates to what you're saying, Sabriaya. So Gail asks, why aren't our Black authors represented more in schools, in literature class, or, you know, identified as classics for students? Anybody want to take that on?
Well, I think I think it is changing. And, you know, there's a lot of classics, you know, but I think a lot of it has to do with who's teaching and what they're familiar with and what their foundation is in. A lot of the, you know, a lot of times the teachers don't know, you know, and that's the reality, is that, you know, I realized that it wasn't so much, it was just that my teachers, a lot of what I needed, my teachers didn't know. They didn't have access to, you know, and so the teachers need to be taught as well in this, you know, in this literature, in this foundation. Even with, you know, I went to film school at UCLA, and none of my professors at UCLA knew anything about Black film. I had to learn it on my own. They just weren't taught that. That's not their foundation. So, you know, a lot of it has to do with kind of rethinking the whole thing. And the teachers need to be, I mean, you know, that's why we need teachers who, you know, more teachers of color, and teachers who also, even, you know, even if they're not a teacher of color, teachers who understand the importance of that year, you know. So
I mean, I tell my parents that I work with that you are in charge of that school, right? So if there's something that you would like to see at the school happen, then make it happen. Like, no, so we need this on there, right? And then, you know, set your demands and then set some consequences. And I bet you people start to change their approach to you, right? A lot of times we're consuming as opposed to, you know, like, no, this is actually what would be helpful, right? You know, I've had plenty of teachers that I've sat down with of my son, like, listen, this is actually the way that this needs to look, right? Or somebody sends home this weird poem for them to memorize. Actually, this is the poem that he's gonna memorize, right? Like all of, you're not gonna, you know, we're in this together. This teacher parent thing is a partnership. That's not like a you tell me and we just accept. This is a marriage in some ways. With this common child in the middle. And so, you know, if there's a book that you consider a classic that you would like to see your teacher think about, you get to sit down with that teacher and inform them about how it should look.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the reality is, as Kim was saying, it's growing. So it's not that the books are not there. The books are there. We have to seek out the authors, you know, get the books distributed and figure out how to make sure they're more available in schools. But we just have such a growing number of writers writing these books that they, you know, we need to make sure they're more accessible.
If they need a book, they like to see me get a book for them, or they need Harriet's, like we have, you know, we've been giving away books this entire, you know, since the murder of Breonna Taylor and the murder of George Floyd, we have been committed to giving books away and making sure that people who want books have access to them. So if there's a book, a classic that you would like a teacher to have, and you want to go to that teacher with a hard copy, or you want me to put something in the mail for them, let's do it.
I think also acknowledging that for a lot of times it's the children are kind of like indoctrined also by standardized testing and by kind of like the way in which testing evolves. When I read one of my this is what I do with my treehouse kids as far as when it comes to when they're doing homework. One time it was saying little Sally was rolling down the hill. The hill was this wide and this length, right? And I'm like, okay. And one of my kids says, Miss Sabriaya, I don't got no hills around here. And I said, okay, so replace hills with blocks. And little Sally got 4 houses on each block. What is this? How do you solve this? Right? And immediately it went, oh, I got that. There's 4 houses on each block, Miss Sabriaya, and we going 6 blocks. I got it. And I said, that is why. When I looked at their standardized test, I said, not acknowledging the brains our kids have, the knowledge they have to give out, because it doesn't come from their worldview. And they're like, they can't connect to it. And I think also educators need to read what they're giving their children. I read every book that my kids, like if a kid asks for a recommendation, it's because I've read the book, even if it is a children's book. And I've given it to them and said, here, I've read this. I think you would like this. So good.
Yeah, I think some of my favorite books, Sabriaya, are children's and young adult books, actually. So,
and speaking about, you know, just who the teachers and who's, you know, educating and the parents. What's interesting, Sabriaya, you got to talk to your people in Baltimore, because in my book Buck, you know, we've talked about kind of the experience you had, you know, when you were teaching it, but you know, that book was banned in Baltimore because a parent read it. You know, it was used as you know, district wide, and a parent read, a white parent actually. Very important, because the book was used in the schools for years and years and years in Oakland, Philly, Baltimore, Detroit, you know, Chicago, all these different places. And so this white parent read a passage in Buck completely out of context, posted something about it on Facebook, went viral. The next thing I know, Fox News, ABC, NBC are all in front of this school holding my book up, talking about the book is now banned because of profanity. And I'm thinking, have they read the book? And I approached the administrators, you know, here's a school, you know, here's a school where, and a school district where that's lacking books in general, that students aren't excited to read in general. And here you have a text that they're connecting with, and you ban it. I mean, so we need teachers and parents to be on point, and we got to be advocates. Luckily, we fought, and the book was unbanned. But it definitely, there were a lot of students that weren't able to have access to it because, you know, of just people taking it out of context and not understanding the, you know, the cultural context of the book.
And I think that's like something to think about as we are kind of in the times that we're in now, in terms of how Black books can speak to just what's going on in the world today. So I was thinking, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, like the role of Black books? We know that since the summer, since the protests started, books about anti-racism have been, you know, as you were saying earlier, that people are trying to figure out, okay, what can I do? How can I, you know, what should I read? So do you have any thoughts about the role of Black books today in terms of contemporary times? I know, Jeannine, you mentioned something about people are asking you, like, to give you a list of these books.
I know, and I'm always just like, no, you know, I won't give them a list. And it's just, it's funny because it's like, I'm not willing to do that for you. We do a monthly collection here. We change the collection every month. These are the ones that we're suggesting for the month. That's the list. And then, you know, but I think that my concern is that people have been given a syllabus. They've been given, you know, these lists, and then they feel like after they've gotten through that list that they have somehow achieved they've gotten to the mountaintop. And so I'm pushing back against that mentality a little bit of like, here's a list and now you got it. I encourage people to, here's my perspective. Yes, you bought a book, right? Because we have a bookstore, great. You read the book, great. You analyzed the book, great. You discussed the book, great. Now be moved to action as a result of the book that you just read. And like that step, a lot of times is where I find people get a little stuck, right? It's just like, what do you mean move to action? I'm like, you just read a book, right? Like I, for example, right after I read Nickel Boys, I can't read Nickel Boys and not do something about young people being incarcerated right now in front of my face. Like I can't, you can't read Buck and not think about the education system and then say, like, besides think about it and besides analyze it and besides discuss it, but we move to action in some way and not say, this is going to be a book that we're going to make, we're going to make available for people who might want it in alternative schools across the city, right? Like that's when you're moved to action. So I'm encouraging people in their reading to think about that as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that Sabriaya, did you want to chime in or?
Yeah,
or you
to go back on what you were saying, I think for me, I want for Black Books Matter to mean that it doesn't matter just when the wave has come, just when we've gotten to, another one of our Black brothers and sisters have died, right, have been killed. This is when I want to read about anti-racism. This is where I know that these become a norm. When I tell my children that even though they have a shelf full of books, that they're still only represented in 10% of all children's books, to them it's like, what you mean? And I think that is something that always behooves me, that there are animal books that are more represented than children. Than our Black children, they're like, and I'm like, you can find an animal book more easily. And even when Trios gets donations, a lot of times I see that in reflection, because we get a lot of books that are not necessarily donated by people that not necessarily reflect the demographic that we serve, right? So when they donate books, they're not necessarily books that are for Black children, right? And the notion is, oh, we're just giving books, but I'm like, no, the notion is that that we are serving a purpose in a community. So put your action behind it and give what you think that this demographic needs, right? And just to rephrase it, not what you think, but what that they need access to, right? And so I think that's something that I want to see. I want to see the revolutionary thought behind Black books become normalcy, right, and become a standard.
MK, I think if you dare, I'm gonna let you have the last word, because we're finishing up. I'm gonna let you have the last word here.
Yeah, well, I just think that the future of Black literature, definitely is going to continue to be pioneered by Black women. That's why I'm thankful to be on this panel today. And I think also it needs to be a standard, as Sabriaya was saying. And I think the thing I would end on too is that Black books, people there's so much talk about racism and anti-racism today, and obviously we've been talking about it since 1619, since 1526. You know what I'm saying? This isn't, but I think it's also important not to put all of that on Black authors. And what I mean by that is that Black authors, we spend a lot of time addressing racism, as we should, but in so many ways this is really a white problem. And white people need to address racism, their racism, and this I mean, people ask me, well, what do you think about this, and ask me about racism. I have no idea. I'm not. I don't see my brothers and sisters having this problem with white people. I see it all coming from this system of white supremacy and coming from this system of trying to whether it's enslave or colonize, so my thing is like Black diversity, and I love to see my students come in with these writing and with freedom fighting and liberation, and some of them may be in a completely other realm or take place on another planet. And I think Black authors and Black readers need to be able to experience literature in all different forms, and not always talking about, you know, always not always a response to racism, because that's not the only thing in our existence, in our world. You always there because we live in America, or we live in the world, and so that's a global system, and so that's always there. But I just think that Black authors should have the freedom to write about whatever they want to write about. And if that's, you know, if that's dealing with systematic injustice, then cool. But if it's not, then cool too, because we need that freedom of expression so that we could be expressing ourselves in a whole way, in a holistic way.
I think I'm going to paraphrase Toni Morrison a little bit to that point, MK, but she talks about this, you know, as if our lives have no meaning or no worth outside of the white gaze, right? So she's like, we're full people, and so authors, you know, definitely should be able to write about the fullness of the Black experience and Black humanity. I'm sure I misquoted her. That's not exactly, but it's kind of. So I think we're a little bit over time, but I want to thank you so much. It's been like an honor of mine to meet all of you, and you know, soon, like Sabriaya, meet you, and Jeannine come out to the bookstore, and hopefully MK, we'll cross paths at some point. But I want to appreciate, I appreciate all of you. Thank you for being on the panel. And I think
at this having me.
Yeah, Sabriaya, you need copies of the book at Treehouse. We got you.
I was just about to say, Jeannine.
I'll send them. Yeah. Right? We got to be moved to action, immediate action, you know?
Yes. Thank you all. This has been beautiful.
And we've given away thousands of copies of Buck, and we're glad to do so. If anyone who's watching is interested, or you know, anyone at Treehouse or anywhere else, if you're interested, just get in touch with us, and we'll make sure that your teachers have books. No cost. All right.
That's wonderful.
All right. Peace.
Thank you guys all so much. We're really excited to have you guys here, and just thankful for this time. And Dr. Brooks, thank you so much for such a wonderful facilitation. It was really, really fantastic.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Sorry, I know there were some technical ins and outs, but
I'm in a new room, so if you so you know, everything changes. It's a new world. Everyone who's watching, we're gonna share a little bit. We're gonna share a 2-minute slideshow of our year so far, and after that, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how you could win that raffle. And so stay tuned for a couple of seconds and check out all the good work that Treehouse has been doing over this past year so far. So we're really glad again that you all came out. I promised that we would talk a little bit about the raffle. So if you came tonight, you are entered automatically into the raffle. And so watch your email, because we're going to announce the raffle. We're going to send an email to everybody. When we pick it, we're going to pick them all at the end of our Champions of Literacy celebration on Thursday. Speaking of Thursday, we have another fantastic panel on Literary Philadelphia. So please come out and see and listen to that author talk. We're really excited to have them and to be sharing that with you. So come back 7 p.m. on Thursday night. So I want to just, of course, thank all the panelists that were on tonight and thank the committee. This takes a lot to make this happen, even through all the glitches and all the things. So we're really thankful to the committee of Treehouse Books Board of Directors for making this happen. And really thankful, of course, to our sponsors. And I want to just put them up here so that we can thank them for what they have given to us here to make this possible. So we're thankful to all of you. We hope that, again, you'll come out tonight or come out Thursday night to see it again. We're, again, so thankful to all of the folks who made this night possible. We are celebrating our 15th year, like I said in the beginning, and I just want to make sure that if you are here and you are celebrating 15 years with us and you brought champagne or something else to celebrate with us, feel free to crack that open now, because we're all going to take a sip or raise whatever you have. Wherever you are, we're going to raise a toast, and we are going to toast the 15 years of Treehouse Books in the North Philadelphia community. We're so thankful to be able to do this work and so thankful to be able to do this with you. Salute. Take care and good night.